I'm a member of the Bat Conservation Trust. I'm also an honorary member of the Gloucestershire Bat Group. I'm also an honorary member of the Gloucestershire Caving Club. So I've been heavily involved in bats underground, in caves, in mines, etc. So this evening, this talk is on bats. Bats are of the order Chiroptera. And Chiroptera is Greek for winged hand. So that's what bats are. They've got their winged hand. They are found all over the world, all of the continents apart from Antarctica. How many bats do you think there are in the world? I talked earlier on with some people. Have a guess.
Bats or bat species?
Bat species, yeah. Sorry? More. It's 1,500. End of last year, a small island, a volcanic island off the west coast of Africa, near Chad and the Cameroons, Bioko, a bat fell out of a tree. When it was picked up, they identified it as a new bat species, the 1,500 bat species. It's a pipistrelle. The bats in the world come into two groups. There's the Megachiroptera and the Microchiroptera. The Megachiroptera are the old world fruit-eating bats. So they eat pollen, nectar, fruit. Whereas the Microchiroptera, they're all eating insects, etc. So in the UK, our bat species are all the Microchiroptera. So I mentioned about the winged hand of a bat. Well, this shows you, here's the arm, the elbow, the thumb, second, third, fourth finger. So what the bats have done, they've developed over millennium. They possibly started off as a shrew-like mammal, predated on, and they've slowly developed to come out at night. So if we compare the bat's wing with our arm, you can see where we've got the fingers here, and the bat's fingers are extended out to carry the membrane of its wing. Bats are very agile, like this great horseshoe bat, but they're very clumsy on the ground. In fact, there is one species in New Zealand that actually only feeds on the ground. It's the only bat in the world that does that. But bats have three senses the same as us. They use their nose to smell for food. They can see. They're not the old saying you hear, blind as a bat. They can see, but it's more evolved for twilight vision. But the sense which they've developed mainly is their hearing. And this is why they're able to fly out at night and get their prey. So here you hear this old saying, oh, blind as a bat, or a bat's going to get caught in your hair, or a load of rubbish. What the bats do, they use a system that we call echolocation. So the bats, and now I'll digress slightly. In the UK, we have 18 species of bat, or subspecies. We have there's 2 horseshoe bats, and there's 16 vesper bats. The horseshoe bats, they emit their sonar from their nose, and they got a horseshoe nose leaf, that's why they call it a horseshoe bat. Hits the prey and comes back, and they pick it up in their ears. Whereas the vesper bats, they emit the sound from their mouth, so they're slightly different. but it's the same technique. So here you can see the bat's firing out, it hits whatever it's aiming at, comes back to pick it up, and then it can then slowly move in to catch its prey. As Claire said, bats can catch insect on the wing. They can catch it with their mouth, they can wrap their wings around, or they can catch it in their tail membrane, which is here. And quite often they will then go and fly up to a perch, particularly if they're after the moths or the beetles, hang up upside down and devour that. They tend to tear off the wings and the legs and eat all the juicy bits. So this is a checklist of British bats. It's a little bit out of date. And you notice there's red markings. Those are bats which have a heavy reliance on caves. This could be tunnels, railway tunnels, canal tunnels, ice houses, cellars, mines, etc. And then the green ones have a less dependence on underground sites. This is a greater horseshoe nursery roost. This is where the young are born, and this is what we call a creche. So all the young gathered together, with their body temperature, it keeps them warm while the mothers have gone out to feed. If you've got a non-pregnant female and the males, they tend not to be anywhere near the nursery roost because it's most important for the feeding mothers to be able to get the prey which they're after to feed. The bats are mammals, the same as us. They breastfeed their young for 3 weeks until they can eventually feed, which their mothers teach them. So if we look at the two bat families we have, this is the horseshoe family. The one on the left is a greater horseshoe bat, the Rhinolophus vernequinum. That's about the size of a pear, so it is quite a large bat. The bat on the right is a lesser horseshoe, the Rhinolophus hipposiderus, and they hang free from ceilings and they wrap their wings around themselves. When you look at that picture, is there something there that makes you think, well, how does it hang up there? Why doesn't it fall off? Because when they go into hibernation, it's not really a hibernation, it's what we call torpor. They'll go in this case, in a cave or a mine or tunnel, they'll hang up and they slowly lower their body temperature down and their heart rate down. And I think of that like if you've got a gas central heating with your boiler, it's just on tick over. That's the pilot light going, and you want the central heating on, the hot water, you turn the thermostat, boom, up it comes. That's how I liken it to bats where they're in hibernation. So they are conserving energy, but they don't stay in hibernation or in torpor throughout the whole of the winter. If it's warm, they can sense what's happening outside. They'll come out to feed possibly, or if it's colder, they may go further into their hibernation roost where it's a warmer place. In fact, the horseshoe bats, they like it warm, so they tend to be much further in the cave systems. So how is this bat able to carry on hanging up there? If you think back to when you were a child in the playground, you know, the old climbing bars, you used to swing along, your arms get tired and you have to drop off. Well, what these bats do, when they hang up and as they go into torpor and their weight comes down onto their feet, they've got an additional tendon. So as this weight comes down, the tendon causes their claws to lock. So that's how they're able to stay hanging up there. Even to the extent if they died, they'll still be hanging up there. Yeah, and we've seen that underground. So when we look at the life cycle, a yearly life cycle in the year of a bat, in autumn, the bats, because they're eating insects, there's not so much food about. They start to go to their hibernation place, which might be in a tree, it might be underground, it might even be in a house. And the mothers will take the young with them to show them where they're hibernating. And they've got another additional interesting part of the life cycle. If you imagine they're hibernating, they're probably not going to eat very much, if anything at all, during the winter. Depends on how bad the winter is. They mate in the autumn. So these aggressive males are hanging around outside the hibernation roost, waiting for the females to come so that they can mate. And then that mother has got to carry those babies inside herself as it's growing all the way through the winter till spring when they come out so they can feed again. So what the bats do, when they mate, the females, they've got a vaginal plug which prevents the sperm from what's the word? To fertilize the egg. So she retains that sperm inside her. And then in the spring, then that she drops the plug, can be fertilized, and then end of June, beginning of July, the baby's born. And they usually only have one pup a year. It's usually maybe between up to about 4 years before they start breeding. And bats can live up, some of the bigger bats, for about 30 years. So these horseshoe bats, they're reliant heavily on underground, and that's one of my speciality because I'm a potholder. Well, I don't do so much now. Heavily involved in the Forest of Dean and on the Cotswolds with all the underground sites where we've got lots and lots and lots of bats, particularly lesser horseshoe bats, which Gloucestershire is very rich in. In fact, we have one site in the Forest of Dean where we get well over 1,000 lesser horseshoe bats underground. So that is quite impressive. So if we look at where these bats are, the great horseshoe bats is just really down in the southwestern corner. We've probably lost about 98% of the great horseshoe bats over the years. We'll come on to how that's happened. They are beginning to spread a little bit. In fact, the greater horseshoe bat was the first bat to be protected under the Rare Plants and Animals Act. And with the lesser horseshoe bat, it's got a bigger range in England, but also over on the west coast of Ireland. And we've got a chap from Ireland over here, from Derry, and we've had a little chat about Ireland. So yes, it's a stronghold for lesser horseshoe bats over in Ireland. Now, this is quite a rare bat. This is the Bechstein's bat. First found in Gloucestershire in 1954 in a shop doorway in Gloucester. And 2 lads from the Grip Grammar School took it back, and their science teacher, Bomber George, because he was a bomber pilot during the war, recognised it as the Bechstein's bat. First time it had been seen in Gloucestershire. And that comes on to another story I'll tell you a bit later. So the Bechstein's bat, again, it's really just down in the south and up to the Midlands. It really is an ancient woodland bat. We have found bat droppers underground, which has been, DNA checked, over 3,000 years old. So it is quite an old bat. It loves ancient woodland. So the Forest of Dean is a good stronghold for Bechstein's bats. This is another very rare bat, the Barber-style bat. It's, again, an ancient woodland bat. We've actually found 4 of these bats underground in a railway tunnel up at Chedworth, near Chedworth Roman Villa. So that's where we find quite a lot of these bats that frequent underground in disused tunnels. And the Barber-style is, again, really up to the Midlands. Where we had the horseshoe bats hanging free, many of the bats that get underground, they like to go into crevices. So this is a bat called a Natterer's bat. I can tell it's a Natterer's bat because I can see this very white front, and it's got almost like a ski ramp on its ears. It curves out. So trying to identify bats in the hand, it is a technique. And this bat is quite widespread. Claire mentioned about the long-eared bats. We have 2. We have the brown long-eared on the left and the grey long-eared on the right. Brown long-eared is over quite a bit of the country, but the grey long-eared we only get down on the south coast. And you can see the size of the ears on this brown long-eared. The grey long-eared is in hibernation. What it's done, it's folded its ears to its side, and these 2 pointed things hanging down, they're called the tragus. They're part of these lobes that we have. Interesting with the long-eared bats, because they've been involved in a war with moths. So the moths are sensing that there's long-eared bats about, and the long-eared bats are, because of their big ears, they can echolocate at a very, very quiet level. In fact, when I've been out, and the lady from the Star Centre, I did a survey for the golf course up there. I couldn't pick the long-eared up on my detector. I actually saw them as they flew by us. And that's how we're able to see. So there's a war going on between the bats and these moths. So the brown long-eared, quite widespread. The grey long-eared just really down on the south coast. The interesting thing is there was a lady that lived up in Cheltenham Kings. She used to look after owls. And any vets that had bats, they used to take the bats up to her, and she used to ring me, "Oh, Maurice, I've got another bat. Can you come in, take it?" So she'd put it into a bat box. I'd take it on, I'd look after it. And if the bat was okay, I would then release it where it was found. But invariably, the bat was injured, so we took it to a bat sanctuary. There's one over near Evesham. And one evening she rang me up and said, "Oh, we got a grey long-eared bat." I thought they were down on the south coast. When I went to pick it up, it wasn't a grey long-eared bat, it was a brown long-eared bat, but it was a juvenile brown long-eared bat, which is actually grey. So it just goes to show you need to be quite savvy. It's another of our bats we get on. This is called a whiskered bat. It's gone in a torpor. It's actually covered with condensation. And what these bats do when they go underground, they lower their body temperature down to where they're actually hibernating. So when I go underground, I've got a thermal monitor, so I can fire it adjacent to the bat, so I can see what temperature that is. I know then what the temperature those bats are hibernating at, or should I say into torpor. So this is the cousin of the whisker bat. This is the Brandt's bat, first identified as a separate item, as a separate species in 1971. And it's mainly due to the anatomical differences between the two. That's the only reason why they're able to identify them. But what we're able to do now is to separate these species much more, is by using their echolocation frequencies. So with a bat detector, so I can tune that in either to whatever the frequency the bats operate at, or I can set the frequency. And then that's the second way how we've been able to. So I can identify the bat in the hand, identify the bat by using a bat detector, or now as science has moved on, and I've done it using DNA. So I've done DNA to get historical information on my ancestral family, so I can see how far I go back and where it leads me. So that's the other route that we've been able to do. So the Brandt's bat was identified purely by the difference between that and the whisker bat. There's another bat now in that family. It's called the Alcathoe. I don't have a slide of it. So there's three that's all close together. So this is the whisker Brandt's. The air, not up in Scotland, but most of England and Ireland. And this is the Daubenton's bat, which Claire mentioned. We often call this the water bat. If you've got any large ponds, like down in Sanford or in Pittville, you will often find the Daubentons skimming over the water, picking up the midges, etc. that's there.
Are they quite large?
No, they're a smallish bat. But the thing on the bat detector is, as they're homing in on the things, they actually make it sort of beep, 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 beep with the detector, and then suddenly that's when they're actually homing in just at the point of contact with their prey. So that's quite useful to know. So this is the Daubentons. Again, it's widespread. The water bat. Now this is quite an interesting side. This is our largest bat. This is the mouse-eared bat, the greater mouse-eared bat. Over about the last 30 years, it's been declared extinct about 3 times. It's quite prevalent on the continent. If you ever go over to Poland, there's all the underground fortifications that were there during the wars. A lot of bats now hibernate, and I'm talking of thousands and thousands and thousands of bats hibernate in these underground tunnels. And there are large numbers of greater mouse-eared bat. They have bred in this country, but only find them down on the south coast in some underground stone quarries. And last year there was an aging male and also a juvenile, so we know they are mating, they are breeding somewhere, but we haven't found that small colony of greater mouse-eared bats. So those are the bats which we find, which use all these underground sites. When we come to trees, here's an old woodpecker hole, which nocturnes have been using. And as they come out from the hole, they're defecating and urinating, so we're seeing the telltale down there. And this guy's got, he's listening with like a stethoscope to listen for the nocturnal bats which are inside the tree. So this is the Rata Mouse bat is our largest bat. This is also quite a large bat. Now, Claire was talking about all the plants that be nice for you to grow in the garden or in your allotments, because we do get certain bat species, like the long-eared bat, the pipistrelle bat, and the Daubenton's bat, which we were to. They're the ones which you're likely to see in your garden, etc. Where we live, we got a public footpath at the back of us with hedges. And we have a pip that comes along, flips over the hedge, goes round our apple tree, over the neighbour's hedge, then round her pear tree, and then just disappears somewhere else. But most bats tend to come out at dusk. But the nocturnal bat quite often will come out an hour or so before sunset, and they fly quite high up. So there's a big interest with swifts. And what sometimes you'll find that you think, oh, that's a very slow flying swift. It may not be a swift, it could be a nocturnal bat. And I was on a walk up over Cleve Hill a couple of years ago with a caving club. And sure enough, in the middle of, just before sunset, there was a nocturnal bat just flying over. I had my bat detector with me. I could get the tonk, tonk, tonk of the nocturnal bat. So these are bats which are required. They use trees predominantly. This is the nocturnal's cousin. This is the Lysla's bat, a smaller version, but very similar, still heavily used for use of trees. But what about the bats which actually use houses? Now, these modern houses, a lot of bats love them because they get under the soffits, under the tiles, under these boards. They get in through the air vents, into the cavity walls. Of course, we've created a problem now because a lot of modern houses, there aren't any cavity walls anymore. It's all filled up with insulation. So with the Bat Conservation Trust and English Nature work in the building industry, they now build bat bricks into the walls, same as like with the swifts. So it's a similar idea. This is the Serotine bat. It's the one bat which uses buildings more than any other. In fact, it could use that nursery site in the house all the year round. You can use it for hibernation as well, which is a bit unusual for bats. Most of them will have a summer nursery site and they'll have a winter hibernation site. But the Serotine bat is the one bat that possibly can use the same building, the same site all the year round. Of course, the bat, which we all know about, the pipistrelle, we have 3 pipistrelle. Again, initially, this is the common pipistrelle, and we have the soprano pipistrelle. They were segregated purely because they use different echolocation frequencies. There's now a third, an enthusiast pipistrelle, which we do get on the continent, but that now has been identified through DNA. So we have 3 pipistrelle bats. They will use trees, but they will also use houses. You never find these bats in your loft spaces. It's always in the cavity walls, under the boards, etc. It's the horseshoe bats that we particularly use in old houses up in big loft spaces, that we use the loft spaces. Have any of you ever been to Woodchester Mansion? There's some nodding. That's good. Because in Woodchester Mansion, it's a house or a mansion that was never completed. But the interesting thing is, we get horseshoe bats in there that use the roof space as a summer nursery roost. And there's some cellars that they use during the winter for their winter roost. So it's open in the summer for people to go and view. And there's a bat room. So you can go in there, and there's recorders which is live. You can actually move it around. It's great for children. You can home in to look at the greater horseshoe bats, or in the other room, the lesser horseshoe bats. So that's a place to go if you want to get a real close-up look at bats. So here's a slide, changing numbers of bats hibernating in the cave. So there we got 3 there. And what we find is, beginning of the winter, the brown long-eared we'll find, then they'll disappear. Then towards the end, they come again. And then the Daurbentons, they slowly come in, they peak up middle of the winter. Then the Natters, we don't see them at all. Then suddenly they shoot in and then drop off. So this is what we find when we go underground. Of course, one of our problems with these bat species is many of them are up in crevices. So unless you know where you are, you imagine a disused iron mine where all the waste rock is all stacked up like a garden wall. It would take you forever looking at all the little cracks to find out where these bats are. And down in one of the disused iron mine in the forest many years ago, they used to drill holes for blasting the rock. Just curiously, I looked down a shot hole, which is about 12 inches deep, and there was a bat down the end of it. Now you tell me, in a chamber this sort of size, there's a tiny little 1.5-inch hole there on the wall. How did that bat find that hole? I don't know. Claire's also mentioned about habitats for the bats, most important. So unimproved grasslands, woods, all these trees here, ideal feeding grounds for bats. Bats are quite secretive. They're very sociable. But because they've got this secretive nature about them, they've been misunderstood. They've been persecuted. In fact, you mentioned about the bats that eat fruit, etc. They are killed for food quite often in the Far East, because some of those bats, they may have a 1.5 meter wingspan. They could be the weight of a bag of sugar. That's a lot of meat. So unfortunately, bats are killed for food. So again, Claire mentioned about don't do things with your trees, leave them. So there's 6 bats. So we've got the nocturnal, this one here, I was talking about flying high up, zipping down, about getting whatever insects are about up there. And then the serotine, now this is an interesting bat. There's this one here, the serotine comes along and suddenly it dies almost down ground level and back up again. What's it doing? It's one of the large bats that tends to like the beetles. In this case, it's dung beetles. And at a committee meeting I had over Nailsworth some years ago, right next to the guy's house, there was a field of dairy herd, and these serotine bats flying back and forth, and suddenly, as the dung beetles was taken off from the cowpats, that's what they were catching, the dung beetles. And then we got the pipistrelle, the pips here, flitting back and forth. Then the brown long-eared, flying in and out of the trees, and the backstone here, round and round the trunk, and then the greater horseshoe here. Over its Woodchester mansion, which we have 2 greater horseshoe nursery colonies in the county. 2, that's all. One's at Woodchester, the other one is down in the Forest of Dean at Little Dean Hall. One of the problems with farming today is with dairy herds, if the cattle get mastitis, they have injections, antibiotics, etc. That goes into the cow's stomach, it goes into the poo, so that cow pat is now dead. So there's no beetles in it. So it's another form of us upsetting Mother Nature. But fortunately, what the farmers do know, they're working with Natural England and the Bat Conservation Trust. The herd's there, and all the grass as well. There's no herbicide, they don't use any insecticide, so it's all back to nature. So that is helping those greater horseshoe bats recover. And one of the biggest problems with bats is when you have a crash, it takes many years to build back up. And what you can get, if the colonies get too small, you get interbreeding. So one of the things we found with, I'll come on to that a little bit later on. The other thing to look at is, depending on the bat and where it's feeding, it's got a different wing shape. So we've got the noctules up the top here, big wing shape, flying quite high up. Whereas the smaller brown longer-haired, it's a shorter, wider wing, that's flitting in and out. So it's almost like you think about in the aerospace industry, you've got the big jet aircraft, the bombers, or big passenger planes, their wing shape, and then you get a smaller fighter jet, their wing shape, because they've got 2 different roles. It's the same with the bats. Because of what they're feeding on and where they're feeding, that dictates their wing shape. This one, Claire has mentioned a little bit. So we've got the greater horseshoe, brown long-eared, and the pipistrelle. This shows typically what the bats are eating. How do you know what they're eating? Well, particularly with the horseshoe bats, where their nursery roosts are, bat experts collect the poo and then they break it down so they can see what the bats are eating. That's basically what they're doing. Cockchafers, again, important for the bigger bat species like the horseshoe bats, etc. And Claire mentioned about the, what was the bug, the beetle you were on about in the grass, the leather jackets. Interestingly, where I've got an allotment up at Cheltenham Kings, we've got a green woodpecker that continually comes up onto a telegraph pole. It doesn't peck there because obviously that's all chemicalized, but it flies down onto the grass path and it's pecking away, and that's what it's after. It's after those. So these big beetles you have for the horseshoe bats, the ceratines, etc. This is what they're after. This is typical over in East Anglia. Devastation for bats. Monocultures. The bats require, when they go from the nursery roost to their feeding roost, they need to have a flight path. They need to have some form of protection. They use hedgerows. So they fly from where the nursery roost is to where they're feeding. So the hedgerows are gone. all these fields are treated with chemicals, so there's nothing there for insects for the bats to eat. Another problem with forestry. We talked a bit earlier on about the nocturnal bats using the old deciduous trees where there's woodpecker holes, or if a branch breaks off, a hole appears. Again here, very little insect life for bats. But one of the things that we can do is where a lot of the old trees which have been felled because of health and safety, etc., or the pine trees, we can make bat boxes. But there's one very important thing. If you build bat boxes, you must use timber which is not treated, because they're a mammal like us. The chemicals in that, it could kill them. So you use untreated timber. And in Cheltenham Kings, last year, the parish council got some funding, and I was able to source some quite cheap timber from timber place in Gloucester. So the local Cheltenham Kings Scouts, or the leaders, made some bat boxes, which the parish council was able to put up. So this is something else which, you know, is good to encourage the local youth, you know, the scouts, the guides, the nursing cadets, the air cadets, the Baptist chapel, to get them, encourage them to get involved with bats.
Can I just ask you a question? We are going to make some bat boxes.
Yep.
I've got absolutely no idea, once we've made them, where to put them.
Yeah, well, I've got some leaflets I can let you have on what to make and where you should put them. You want to get them, basically get them high up off the ground as you can to stop the youth of today knocking them off.
Yeah, you don't get those kind of youth.
No, that's okay. So here's typically where the wooden bat box has been put. You normally put 3 per tree. One facing north, one facing southeast, one facing southwest. The bats generally be in the 2 southern facing trees. If it starts to get too warm, they will move into the northern facing bat box. The record for the number of bats which have been found in a bat box, have a guess. How many do you think has been found in a bat box? They're not very big. How many? More.
50.
More.
No.
Yeah, 65. Yeah, 65 bats in that thing. Guys, imagine your front room crammed with 65 people. One of the problems we've had over the years with houses, particularly older houses where you get woodworm or dry rot, wet rot, etc., is chemical treatment of the timbers. Well, this has been catastrophic for these bat species which use these loft spaces, particularly the horseshoe bats. But fortunately now, over the last 20 or so years, the Bat Conservation Trust and it's either Natural England or English Nature, and they've changed the names, have worked together, and they've now got a solution for preventing this. How do we monitor where the bats go from place to place? Well, one of the things which people who are doing research on bats have used little bat detectors which they can pick up with an aerial, so you can find, as a greater horseshoe bat, you wouldn't tend to do it on the smaller bat species, so you can track where the bats are going, where they're feeding. And the other thing that has been done is to ring the bats. Again, many bat species were ringed, but now it's only the larger bats, and you have to have a special license for doing ringing. The The first time bats were ringed in Gloucestershire was through the Caving Club I'm a member, honorary life member of, was as early as 1954. So it goes back quite a long way. So these rings have got a number on them. So if it's ringed in the hibernation place and then picked up in the nursery, you can see where it's come from too. So it gives you an idea of where the bats and what they're using, where they're going. It helps with the conservation. Also, underground, with many of our cave and mine sites, we have to grill them. There's a gate for access, particularly where we get lots of hibernating bats, which could be vulnerable to disturbance. If you imagine there's how many are here tonight, I don't know, 15, 16 or so, we're kicking out about 0.5 kilowatt of heat. So if large numbers of people go underground and there's a group of horseshoe bats here and we stand underneath, we're going to disturb them. And it takes the bat 20 minutes or so to come out of this torpor. It's got to warm itself up. It's got to get its heart rate up, get disturbed. It'll move off. Then it's got to hang up again. It's got to lower it. So it's using up energy. So that is why in some cases, certain species, mines have to have no access during the winter. We have a few of these sites in the forest, particularly where we get hibernating greater horseshoe bats. We've got some sites where we're up to sort of 250 greater horseshoe bats, and they cluster together in a group. So it's important to protect their habitat. Well, all bats are protected by law. The Wildlife and Countryside Act in 1981. Prior to that was the Rare Plants and Animals Act, which protected just the greater horseshoe bat. But since then, we've had the Bonn and Bern Convention. So not only the hibernation sites protected, the nursery roosts are protected, and also help with their roots going from the nursery sites to their feeding grounds. So there is a lot of protection. If you want to get involved with bats, if you want to handle bats, you need to be licensed. I've retired now, but I was up to a level 4, which is the one just below a ringing license.